So today's video is a little bit different. I haven't really written anything or planned this, so it will be a little bit different. But as pretty much all of you will know by now, earlier this week, Chester Bennington from Linkin passed away, and we've had a lot of, high-profile celebrity deaths in this past couple of years that seem to have really affected the population, on quite a personal sort of level. A lot of people have died who have been inspirations musically, in the acting world, in the art world, and for me, this particular death has had quite an impact. And I didn't want to write anything. I didn't want to plan this so much. I wanted it to come from the heart, really, and that's why this would be a lot different. And for me, this death, Chester's death, has quite a poignant meaning. Ultimately, Linkin Park were the band that got me into music, and as a lot of you will know, I'm a singer in a band. I've been singing in Speaking in Shadows for 7 years now, and I've been in bands for way longer than that. And my very first band started because of Linkin Park, and kind of as my tribute and as my, in memory of Chester, I wanted to put out this video explaining how I got into music, how I got into singing, how singing became such a huge part of my life, and I wanted to dedicate that to Chester and the rest of Linkin Park, who my heart goes out to right now. This is an awful time. I can't even begin to imagine how they're feeling. So this is my story of how I got into music and how I started singing. When I was at middle school, you could pick up the recorder, and as most people did, made that horrific sound that only recorders can make. I'm not sure the recorder is even a professional instrument. I don't think anyone plays that professionally. What do you do? I'm a recorder player. Anyway, we also had the chance to play violin, and I picked that up because to me that sounded cooler than the recorder, and I played that for many years. And alongside that, I was also in the school choir, and I loved performing. I've always loved performing. We used to get the chance to do end of year shows, and I would always apply to be either the lead role or a role that had a lot of singing. I wasn't the most confident, but I sort of threw myself into those kind of things, and I've always just loved it, and I think that love has continued throughout my life. And with the violin, there was a group of us that went up kind of from very, very young up to sort of year 6, so I think that's about, if you're about 11, 12, something like that. And I think I got to grade 4. I was on the way to grade 5 at the time, so relatively proficient player of the violin. Loved it as well, really, was an instrument I loved. And the choir too, loved the choir. We used to do loads of performances in that, and again, just before I left my sort of middle school to go up to secondary school, high school, yeah, we had some choir performances that were amazing. I love those, and got some photos of that as well from those times, good memories and things. And going up to secondary school was a huge step. I went to a school that I only knew 9 people from when I moved up. It wasn't really in like the catchment area. Managed to get in, through sort of appeals and things like that. It was a really, really good school, and my parents wanted me to go somewhere that was a little bit more kind of, a little bit better than the schools that were local to me at the time. So I ended up going to this school with 8 other friends, and yeah, so very new. And when I got there, we had to get the school bus from near where I lived, and in that first couple of weeks I used to take my violin on the bus, and got severely bullied for having a violin, because that is not the manliest of instruments apparently. And unfortunately I buckled to that kind of that peer pressure, and decided I wanted to limit the amount of bullying that I went through, so I stopped playing violin. And that's something I regret, by the way. If any of you are out there are getting bullied or ridiculed for something that you love doing, don't ever stop, but that's by the by. I stopped playing violin and really just kind of carried on singing as a thing. There wasn't really a choir at this school, and so I continued to sing in my own time. And then I hit puberty, and obviously your voice changes quite dramatically. My voice went a lot deeper than it had been, and I could no longer hit any of those notes. So I was kind of at a point in my life where, I was at a bit of a dead end, because I didn't want to play violin, and singing was no longer really an option. It sounded absolutely terrible. I would sit kind of crying in front of my CD player, trying to sing along to, the artists of the time Westlife, Boyzone, Robbie Williams. I think Eminem came out around that time as well, but you can't really sing to Eminem. But those kind of things. It wasn't really that inspiring, and I kind of lost my heart for singing a little bit. I moved up to secondary school in the year 2000, and as a lot of you will know, any Linkin Park fans out there, that is the year that Hybrid Theory was released. And I'll be honest, I hadn't even been introduced to rock music up until this point. Ultimately, we'd had the radio on, sort of the local radio stations, and they only played pop music. As I say, at the time, the only artists really, the only male artists were Westlife, Boyzone, Robbie Williams, and none of those were really about kind of, you know, sort of the empowered, impassioned singing. It was all very kind of cheesy, all very obvious and expected music, and it didn't really appeal to me. It wasn't something that I loved. It was the era of like Spice Girls and Oasis and things like that too, so there wasn't really anybody for me to aspire to be like as a singer, and I kind of, this really put me off. And then a friend of mine introduced me to Linkin Park, and it blew my mind. I'd never heard anything like this. It was a completely different style of music. Imagine never hearing rock music. This wasn't a time when you could go online and just type stuff in. We hadn't really got the internet in the same respect that the internet is now, and you could only listen to what was there or what you bought on CD. And so to suddenly hear this incredible noise, and then after this to get introduced to like Guns N' Roses, Papa Roach, Limp Bizkit, like everyone at that era sort of were just like loud and in your face, and they had a message and they had passion, and I loved that. And of all of those people, Chester stood out to me because he was just such an incredible vocalist, and to me that was exactly how I wanted to be. That was the kind of voice I wanted, the kind of presence I needed, and it kind of rekindled my love for music and for singing again. Not that I could sing it. I tried so hard to sing, and as many singers out there will know, singing to Linkin Park is not an easy task. Chester did not make it easy for people, but that was part of what was so wonderful about his voice. And I had a go, and it was terrible. I remember trying to sing Crawling in one of those old school practice rooms, which was ultimately a keyboard inside a prison cell, and me just screaming, like, you know, really straining my voice. Used to spend most evenings doing that in front of my CD player until my parents came in and told me, you must stop, you have to stop this. The neighbours will ring the police. It is atrocious, you sound like you're being killed. So I took up the drums, and I joined my first band when I was 13 years old, and I was the drummer, and we were looking for a singer for a long time, couldn't find a singer, so I ended up doing both, and I was pretty terrible, but I was getting better, and it was that persistence, and it was that drive, listening to that Linkin Park album. As my time went on, they released Reanimation, then Meteora, and they just gave me more and more songs to aspire to try and sing, things like Numb or Faint, From the Inside, all these incredible songs that I just desperately wanted to be able to sing. And obviously you'd sit and we'd try and scream along to them and ruin our voices, and it's probably why I'm struggling with my voice so much these days, just through the sheer abuse that I put it through at the start. But it was so much fun, and it was just so inspiring, and it filled me with passion and hope and fire. And there was no band that was doing that at the time for me other than Linkin Park. They were just absolutely filling that void for me and giving me something to believe in. When I was being sort of bullied and picked on by these people, this was the music I could go home and listen to. And for so many people, I've seen people writing online that this was a voice of a generation, this was the voice they grew up to, this was the voice of their youth. And I couldn't agree more. I had posters, I had all their albums. I didn't go and see them at this point. I hadn't really got into going into seeing gigs at this time, and to be honest, it wasn't as common as it is now either for young people to go to gigs. It was, you know, it was like a one-off thing. You'd go maybe, you know, once a year, if that. But I loved them. I would constantly watch them on TV and watch their music videos, and just, in the end, what a music video. Back then that was incredible as well, that CGI, that flying fish lizard thing, awesome. Anyway, I continued to try really hard to sing, and I was at a gig playing in this band that I was in at the time, where I was both the sort of drummer and the singer, and I was in multiple bands by this point. I was getting on now for kind of college age and stuff like that. So Linkin Park had released a fair few albums by this point. I think they were just about to release, or had just released, Minutes to Midnight, and I played a show with this band, and a guy came up to me and said to me, that was great, like, you know, it's very rare to see someone play the drums and sing at the same time, and he complimented my drumming. He said, that is some good drumming, but I've seen other people who can play drums like you, but I haven't heard anybody with a voice like yours in a while. And that really inspired me, because I had been putting my parents through it a bit, and my friends were fed up of hearing me, you know, caterwauling and screaming and screeching, and to hear somebody tell me that actually I could sing was really nice. So I took that on board, and when I joined college, I then joined my first band as a lead singer, and started to like build my kind of confidence and build my own skill. Listening back, I did have a long way to go still, and I think that's such a true story when they say that, you know, practice makes perfect, and I had to put in a lot of hours over the years to kind of get to where I am now. But along the way, every time I kind of went through, every time I was feeling sort of down, or you know, my motivation was lacking, Linkin Park would release a new album and it would seem to just resonate with me. Like lyrically, I was blown away by just how much I could relate to what they were talking about, what they were singing about, and the way in which they were talking about it, that passion, that way they presented their message was something that I've always carried with me. I've always wanted to be able to deliver vocally and lyrically in the same way that they do, something that is just so powerful, something that clearly has had an effect on so many people, and that's continued up until now. Even with their latest release, One More Light, which I know a lot of people had bad words for, had negative kind of opinions of, and fine, like, you know, you're entitled to your opinions. But to me, just to see their evolution, they've gone from sort of this new metal sort of pioneer into, you know, kind of these artistic albums like 1,000 Suns that were just kind of one giant piece of artwork from start to finish, and then they went a little bit kind of post-punky until they came back now into this sort of pop music. But everything they ever released just seemed to hit home with me, especially lyrically. And when I heard Heavy for the first time and listened to the lyrics, I mean, admittedly, to begin with, it took me a little while to get into because I didn't expect to hear that from them. But lyrically, was just so blown away, and it was something that I could definitely relate to. Often we find that the hardest battles are the ones we fight in our heads, and unfortunately, it would seem that Chester lost that battle this week just gone, and that did hit me hard. I apologise to anybody that was trying to contact me on that evening or sort of the day after, because I just wasn't ready to talk about that. A lot of people link me to Chester in that I tell a lot of people, I'm quite happy to admit that he is the sort of role model for me as a vocalist, and someone I always aspired to maybe one day sing alongside on stage, or play a show with them, or even play a stage that they've played. And I had a lot of people messaging me saying like, are you okay? Like, I thought of you straight away when this happened. And you know, I am heartbroken that he's gone, and I don't know what that means for the band. I don't know what that means for you know, for their future. And I don't, you know, I'm very sad on a selfish level that that's the end of, you know, Linkin Park as I grew up knowing it, and as so many people grow up knowing them, and they have left us such a wonderful plethora of music and meaning and messages, and I want to say thank you to them for that. I want to say thank you to Chester, and I'm just so grateful that with his inspiration and his kind of his motivation, he's pushed me into doing something that I have loved for the majority of my life. I've now been in bands longer than I haven't been in bands in my life, and it's been the best time of my life. I've met so many wonderful people, I've had such wonderful experiences, and none of that would have happened if I hadn't have listened to Linkin Park back in 2000 when they released One Step Closer. And that's amazing. And that's why I love music, and that's why I think people need to support their local music scene and support music in general, because without music, so many of us wouldn't get through the day, so many of us wouldn't have somewhere to go to find somebody that actually relates to how we feel inside, and to help us get through when we have these like dark spells that go through our minds, these awful pits that we feel like we'll never be able to get out of, because I know a lot of people experience that. I've felt very, very similar things to this, and not that I've ever labelled those things, but without music, without being able to sit in a dark room sometimes and just blast out an album, whether that's Linkin Park or some other artist, whoever it is that resonates with you, without being able to do that, I feel like the world would be a much darker and harder place. So that's my story. That is how Chester Bennington, how Linkin Park inspired me to be a musician, and thank you so much for that. I am heartbroken for you all. I'm devastated for Chester's family, and even for Chester, that he felt that was the only thing that he could do to silence those voices, to stop that noise, and to get over whatever it was. And I hope, you know, I hope that the people around him and the fans and everybody remember him in the positive light, and not in some of these negative lights that I've seen being shone around the fact that it was suicide, or allegedly suicide, or whatever, because that suicide isn't cowardly. Suicide is the last cry for help or a final effort to overcome some awful, terrible situation. And I don't agree that suicide is the answer, and anyone out there that is feeling that way, I'm going to put some like suicide awareness links and some links to places that can help you out in the comments below, just in case you ever feel that way and you need professional help. And there is no shame to be had in looking for professional help and in reaching out to people, because we need to talk about it. Being stuck in our own heads is the worst possible thing that could ever happen when you feel that way. So please reach out. Do not go the same way that Chester went, no matter how terrible your life may seem at that time, because that is not the answer. And it is an absolutely devastating shame that is how Chester chose to end his life. But we can't forget what incredible, wonderful, beautiful, brilliant, hurtful, insane music they released, that they've left for us to love for the rest of our lives and to pass on to future generations. So thank you for that. Thank you for inspiring me to be a musician and giving me the confidence to not care what other people think about things that I love and to just get on with it and do it. That's huge. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching this. I'm going to post my cover that I recorded recently with Taylor Jane to Heavy, which is just down here. I'd like to tribute that, I'd like to dedicate that to Chester, to Linkin Park. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you very much for watching.